everyone. We are the group number 3. I am Joro Botiasila.
I'm Archie Pino.
I'm Jen Benedict Fernan.
Utilitarianism is a moral philosophy that says the best action is the one that maximizes utility. Utility is often defined as the greatest good for the greatest number of people, but it can also be defined in other ways like maximizing happiness or minimizing suffering.
For example, in the famous case of Robin Hood. As is well known, Robin Hood steals properties from the rich and gives them to the poor. From the point of view of Christian ethics. Take note, Christian ethics. Robin Hood's action is immoral because it deprives the rich of the right that is due to them. However, from the point of view of utilitarianism, Robin Hood's action is morally good because it produces maximum benefits, the greatest happiness, to the majority of the people.
According to Jeremiah Bintam, utilitarianism is a moral and legislative principle focused on maximizing happiness for the greatest number of people. He believed that human actions are governed by two sovereign masters, pleasure and pain.
Summary of Utilitarianism by John Stuart Mill. It defines utilitarianism as a theory based on the principle that actions are right in the proportion as stated to promote happiness, wrong as stated to produce the reverse of happiness. Mill defines happiness as pleasure, and that of his opinion, he argues that pleasure can differ in quality and quantity, and that a pleasure that are rooted in one's higher faculties, intellectual, moral, and aesthetic faculties, should be within more heavily than a pleasure of lower qualities, animal pleasure.
Here are the key concepts and principles of utilitarianism.
Consequentialism. Utilitarianism is a consequentialist theory, meaning that the morality of an action is judged solely by its consequences. The intention behind the actions are irrelevant. What matters is the outcome.
It's wrong to kill an innocent person, but is it always wrong? Are there some moral rules that should never be broken? Or is morality ultimately about doing whatever has the best consequences, even if that means breaking the supposed rules? There are two approaches to moral theory that answer these questions very differently. According to consequentialism, morality is ultimately about doing whatever has the best consequences. But according to deontology, there are certain moral rules that should never be broken. How do we decide which theory is better? One thing we can do is think about specific cases and see which view they seem to support. Thanks to philosophers Philippa Foot and Judith Jarvis Thompson, we have some interesting cases to think about. First, let's consider the trolley problem. Imagine a runaway trolley was hurtling down a track. On the track ahead, there are 5 people who are about to be struck and killed by the trolley. Fortunately, there's a fork in the track ahead, and you happen to be standing right next to the rail switch. If you flip the switch, the trolley will be diverted to the other track, and the 5 people will be saved. But there's a catch. Another person is on the other track. So by diverting the trolley and saving the 5 people, you'll be killing an innocent person. Should you pull the lever and kill 1 to save 5? This is a tough question, but most people say that the right thing to do is to pull the lever. Why? Well, it has the better consequence. It's better that 5 live and 1 dies, rather than 1 lives and 5 dies. So this case seems to support consequentialism. It seems okay to kill an innocent person, if doing so would have a good enough outcome. But now consider a different case. Imagine you're the world's greatest surgeon, and you have 5 patients with organ failure. If they do not get transplants today, they'll die. You also have another patient. He came in for his yearly checkup, and as luck would have it, it turns out he's a perfect match for your 5 dying patients. You realize that you could kill this patient and use his organs to save your 5 other patients. Should you do it? Of course not. This appears to be a case where you should not kill 1 in order to save 5. So this seems to support deontology. It appears that there are some moral rules that you should never break, even if doing so would result in more lives saved. We've barely scratched the surface of how to understand these different approaches to moral theory, and there are many different nuanced versions of consequentialism and deontology, and there are other moral theories as well. But for now, if you think that morality is ultimately about doing whatever produces the best outcome, you might be a consequentialist. And if you think that there are some moral rules that should never be broken, regardless of the outcome, then you might be a deontologist.
Maximizing utility. The core principle is to maximize overall happiness or well-being. This doesn't mean every single person gets what they want. It means the best overall outcome for everyone considered. Impartiality. Utilitarianism demands impartiality. Everyone's happiness counts equally, regardless of the relationship to the decision maker. No one's happiness is inherently more valuable than
Impartiality. Interpreters strive to maintain impartiality and refrain from counseling, advising, or projecting personal biases or beliefs. I'm afraid your condition has so many complications that I have to suggest an abortion. Otherwise, we're risking either your life or the baby's.
Что? Врач предлагает вам сделать аборт. Вы ведь знаете, что наша религия этого не позволяет. Я бы никогда не сделала. Я, конечно, не знаю, насколько вы религиозны, так что...
I'm afraid your condition has so many complications that I have to suggest an abortion. Otherwise, we're risking either your life or the baby's.
Боюсь, в вашей ситуации столько осложнений, что я вынужден предложить вам аборт. В противном случае мы рискуем либо вашей жизнью, либо жизнью ребенка.
Aggregation utilitarianism involves aggregating the consequence for all individuals affected by an action that a total amount of happiness or well-being is what matters, not just the happiness of select few.
What is aggregation? Explain with example. Aggregation. Aggregation is a way of composing different abstractions together in defining a class. For example, a car class can be defined to contain other classes such as engine class, seat class, wheels class, etc. Other examples of aggregation are a window class containing menu class, checkbox class, etc.
Utilitarianism often associated, but not always essential. Many utilitarian theories equate utility with the pleasure of happiness, wherever some forms of utilitarianism focus on other things like preference, satisfaction, or overall well-being, even if it does involve a pleasure.
Hedonism. Hedonism is the belief that pleasure, or the absence of pain, is the most important principle in determining the morality of a potential course of action. Pleasure can be things like sex, drugs, and rock and roll, but it can also include any intrinsically valuable experience, like reading a good book. Hedonism is a type of consequentialism, and it has several forms. For example, normative hedonism is the idea that pleasure should be people's primary motivation. On the other hand, motivational hedonism says that only pleasure and pain cause people to do what they do. Egotistical hedonism requires a person to consider only his or her own pleasure in making choices. Conversely, altruistic hedonism says that the creation of pleasure for all people is the best way to measure if an action is ethical. Regardless of the type of hedonism, critics fault it as a guide for morality because hedonism ignores all other values, such as freedom or fairness, when evaluating right and wrong.
Here are the different types of utilitarianism.
Acts utilitarianism. This focuses on the consequences of individual actions. Each action should be evaluated based on whether it maximizes utility in that specific situation.
Utilitarianism is based on the principle of utility, which states that we should always seek the greatest balance of good over evil. This means that the greatest pleasure for the greatest number should always be the desired outcome, and that we should always try and diminish the pain for the smallest number of people. However, there is some confusion over whether good equals pleasure. Pleasure is calculated using the hedonic calculus, which uses a variety of variables to find the amount of pleasure an action creates, which is measured in hedons. There are many examples of act utilitarianism in society, such as the business world, with the use of cost-benefit analysis. Ford used this to make the decision to not recall Ford Pintos, even though they were dangerous, because this would make their profits smaller. However, this isn't an example of true act utilitarianism, because act utilitarianism is based around pleasure, not profits. However, in our political landscape, we do find examples of act utilitarianism, and in our justice system as well, such as we've decided to have free education, which leads to a huge amount of pleasure for
Role utilitarianism. This focuses on the consequences of following rules. We should follow that rules, if generally followed, would maximize overall utility. This attempts to address some problems with act utilitarianism, such as potential inconsistency.
And no one should ever look to break the rule, no matter what personal gain they might get. The rules must be obeyed no matter what. But then rule utilitarianism runs into its own problems. What problems? Let's suppose we create a rule. You should never lie. The majority have decided this is a rule as they feel people should always be honest. Let's say one day an innocent person runs into your house. A few minutes later you get a knock at the door and there's a psycho standing there. He wants to kill the innocent person and asks if they're in your house. If rule utilitarians have said you can never lie, you then have to say yes to the psycho and let him kill the innocent person. Do you think it's right in this situation to tell the truth? No, I don't. Well then, rule utilitarianism can't work all the time. Well, why don't we take a soft rule utilitarian approach and we say that we generally keep to the rules but break them when it's necessary? But that is basically act utilitarianism, as you are judging by each actions, and although a rule may be in place, you can break it when you think it's the right action. Yeah, I suppose. So I don't think that can...
Preference. Utilitarianism. This focuses on the satisfying people preference rather than solely on maximizing pleasure or happiness. This addresses concern about subjective measures of happiness.